everybody. Welcome. Here we go again. Let us look at your fan club, RJ. All
Ooh,
right.
ATP-AD metabolism. Ooh.
All right. Well, everybody, welcome to the second episode of RJ's Evolution Hour. For those of you that don't know him, which I can't imagine that would be anybody, I'd like to introduce RJ Downard, author of Evolution Slam Dunk, maintainer of the tip Troubles in Paradise, a methodology of creationism project, regular on Movie Night Live here on Friday nights. Howdy, RJ, how you doing?
Oh, not bad. It's a heat wave here in Spokane, so I've had to worry about watering the damn lawn. But let's see if we can dump some water on the flood and a few other things on the creation evolution front today.
Very good, very good. Okay, now we have our stock questions, but of course we'll be paying special attention to any incoming questions. Obviously in the public chat. Also, we're taking them via Twitter. Um, the hashtag is simply enough. Hashtag Stump the RJ, all one word. So I don't think anybody in the public chat is going to need that, but all right. Let us see what we got here. All right, we'll start with coming in from Twitter from Steve DeBeeve. Let's see. One of the old favorites. Love this one. You ready, RJ?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, here we go. Here it comes. If humans evolved from apes, why are there still apes? Heard that one before?
Oh, gosh, that sure stumped me. Not. That's one of the remarkable tropes in anti-evolutionism, and particularly funny because anti-evolutionists at the higher end of the food chain don't use that argument. The creationists recognize that it's a really bad one, and it's what I call the no cousins rule, which is the idea that uh, you conceptualize evolution as kind of a chain of being where A turns into B, and that means A doesn't exist, and everything related to A is gone except you. So there's nothing in a genealogy to say that when you come on the scene, all of your relatives drop dead. And that's essentially what that's assuming. That, gosh, you can't be my cousin. You can't be that because I'm not my grandfather. Yipes. So what they have difficulty doing is conveying a simple genealogical relationship where you have common ancestry to something beyond just your immediate cousins and aunts and uncles kinds of things. And speciation branching trees are just the same as that. So when we look at our ape cousins, our the orangutans and chimpanzees and all the rest, they're a distant cousin. Our last common ancestor with the chimps is about 10 million years ago. That's quite a ways away. That's before there are hominids. And we've had a lot of branching in between. But there's nothing that says, the chimpanzees might just as easily, if we're descended from apes, why are there still human beings? How parochial of us to think otherwise. You'll notice they usually they home in on that example and not trilobites. If trilobites are descended from early arthropods, how come there are still insects? They don't use that kind of an argument. Why? Because it's us. It's all about us, human beings, where we came from. And that's why they're terribly concerned about all that hominid stuff. The fact of the matter is, though, that the evidence for our common descent from hominids and everything else that we're commonly descended from, going back way before them, is really, really strong. I'll put a link up, I suppose, to my Planet of the Apes chapter, where I went into that, and people can look into more stuff about the history of how creationists have been evading that subject for a very long time. Use that question ever again, just smile sweetly and try to describe to them about the cousins and make sure that they, are able to walk across the street unassisted and can keep their shoelaces tied.
All right, so you're saying that my usual response to the creationists when they ask me that question, which is if God made man from dust. Why is there still dust? You're saying I should go a little more in depth than that. That may not be sufficient. You're
Well,
saying?
that sums it up, but that actually is the same kind of a category there. You know, that's the other matter is cause ain't good enough.
Okay.
Branching speciation is a really fascinating thing, and you'll discover that the people who are likely to use that argument will never have got within 1,000 miles of a systematic paper on the phylogeny of primates, let alone anything else. It's interesting on just the fossil record area, we've probably got a better fossil record than the poor chimps do, because chimpanzees happen to live in an environment that is just deadly for fossil preservation. It's the bones erode away very, very quickly, and so actually chimpanzees have a crappy fossil record. Most of the hominids and mammals in general are known primarily from their teeth, because that's the durable part. Same thing goes for sharks. But we are actually fairly lucky that our ancestors started living in relatively arid environments that actually stood a little bit better chance of being preserved than your average bonzo the chimp does.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Yeah, I put the link up there to Planet of the Apes, which will go into a lot of the history and the anatomical reasons why people in the 19th century, including Darwin and others, started making connections with primates and all the forensic details of why that came about and how anti-evolutionists have avoided that data.
Very good. All right. Let us move on. Let's see. Next question here. Up here we go. This is not. It's not even a question. It is an assertion. RJ, did you know that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, just like the Flintstones?
Oh gosh, he said ingenuously, his mouth dropping to floor. No, they didn't. And in fact, I'll put another link up there to Dynamania, because I went into that specific issue, that not only there no evidence that humans and dinosaurs ever lived together, creationists don't offer evidence that humans and dinosaurs lived together, other than a few archetypal bad cases. If you're familiar with the Paluxy River tracks,
The footprint.
where there are some dinosaur tracks, and some of the tetrapods, tetrapod dinosaurs, theropod dinosaurs, were walking on their toes normally, but they would occasionally push their heels down, and that heel mark interpreted by Carl Baugh and a few other creationists as the footprints of human beings walking barefoot across the field, not in shoes, mind you. But the fact is that no one's ever spotted any case, not only of dinosaur bones and human bones together, which if the creationist model that you find in the Creation Museum of dinosaurs and people living in intimate association, if we have human bones in the fossil record in the flood, why wouldn't their close associate dinosaurs be showing up as well? Hydraulic sorting and stuff wouldn't work, because some dinosaurs were no bigger than human beings and some were quite a bit smaller. So all of that model wouldn't fit as well either. But it's not just dinosaurs. Dimetrodons and anomalocarids, just fill in the blanks of all of the vast numbers of creatures that have lived on the planet. We don't find them being associated with human beings either, because they lived at completely different times. So that one is one where the creationist isn't really paying attention to their own technical data, where the creationists themselves have to be very, very wary of this, that there's no actual paleontology evidence for it. And even they've shot their own foot off on the Paluxy tracks, because the creationists like John Morris and that have accepted that these are not tracks of human beings. And so you have just this little niche market of the Carl Baugh and Kent Hovind branches and that bunch who still insist on these things being real, even though other creationists don't. So the short answer then would be dinosaurs and human beings lived together. No, they didn't.
All right. Yeah. See, from listening, that your first statement, no, they didn't. I would have been fine with that. Uh, because the the extra explanation was definitely merited.
Yep,
All right.
heavy hauler, no fossil beds with dinosaurs and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, that's no doubt about it. And it's no coincidence that creationists don't even try to cite any of the actual physical evidence on this. Worse, not only do you have the physical paleontology, but they form graphical and climatological networks to where we get to see the living ecosystem in little teeny time slices of not only the animals that were alive there, and if there are any coprolites in the deposit, that's fossilized shit, They can tell what it was the predators were eating, and you can tell whether or not it was a herbivore or a carnivore from that thing. And of course, they're going to tell you about what plants were around there, and the kind of plants are telling you the kind of climate. And you could look at the geological data and work out about how drainage systems are working and how monsoons are coming in, and that because of that mountain range that used to be over there, they can find evidence. Huge amount of science data to make whole ecosystems make sense and come alive. And guess how much of that gets covered in the creationist literature? It's a really simple number. If I can get my damn thing in the middle of the screen here. Whoop, I have a devil of a time. My motions are backwards on this because I'm used to moving one direction, and I'm not. I'm an incompetent old fart who's not camera ready. I apologize.
Not a problem. Adds to the ambiance.
Before we go to the next question, someone had mentioned earlier, and it's already scrolled up past the screen, about ATP origins. That's the biochemical system that's closely connected to the flagellum and a few other things there. And I was just looking through, I got like 90 some odd references to just ATPase in my bibliography. And there is technical literature on how that system has evolved and how it's related to the formation of the flagellum, and also how it relating to the early RNA world before the DNA full-blown living systems developed. So there's quite a lot of technical literature there on that, and anybody who wants to pursue that a bit further, they can go over to #tip and be fielding a question there, and I can cover it a little bit more in detail there.
Alrighty.
And more little comment tabs that are like little lonely little places. There's nobody commenting or asking questions, but you can do it. There's a one on every single one of the tabs there at #tip or toucan.wordpress.com.
Indeed, and all right, and a slight pause before the next question. RJ, why don't you throw your both your GoFundMe and your Patreon links into the public chat so people know where it is. I put it in before,
yeah,
but
okay.
it's long gone.
Let me get my little here so I can plug them in. Make sure that everything is properly done. Yeah, and the I'll stick in the Tortuga, the other one. So let me hear on that.
All right, very good. Yeah, and,
I can multitask that. I'll multitask that while we pursue with the questions, because I can hear you and see. I'm currently plugging in, so ask away and whatever.
All right. Yeah, RJ's typing. Everybody, if you can assist, please do. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh, here we go. Next. Another assertion. All hominid fossils are either fully human or fully ape. Did you know that, RJ?
Oh, not only did I not know that, it's because it's not true. That's one. In fact, that whole Planet of the Apes thing that I linked to, I go into all that taxonomic issue. I'll give you the kind of the short form on that. You've got, how do you define what it is that makes a human being a human being? Anatomically, we're actually really boring primates. That's why we're in the hominid primate family. Linnaeus put us back in there, and he was a creationist. You've got the physical structure. We're a bipedal ape, got a really big brain, although not all of us use it as much as we should. And those features you can see tracing as you move from the very earliest of the pre-Australopithecines through the Australopithecines into finally Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and then that branches off into our species. What's always the case, and I mentioned this in Planet of the Apes, is that when you get to the area where the transition is taking place, you're always finding these taxa that are really hard to classify. And that's precisely because transitionals are transitional. So to this day, there's a bit of a debate as to whether or not the Homo habilis is actually the most advanced of the Australopithecines or the first of the Homo genus. It's just hair splitting as to whether you want to define it. Even the creationists, the few baraminologists who have tackled this point, I think Todd Wood or Kavanaugh, one of the two, did a little bit on it. He had a devil of a time figuring out what's what, and actually managed to lump one of the Australopithecine species in with human beings, which, you know, should cause any creationist to go, what? And they've always had trouble pigeonholing these early forms, and Homo erectus in particular, where some creationists would arbitrarily decide it's just an ape and others decide it's arbitrarily just fully human. Anatomically, Homo erectus, that lived from about 2 million years ago down to, well, actually overlapped with human beings, and in some spots, that little Homo floresiensis from the Hobbit guy is thought to be maybe a remnant population of Homo erectuses that got dwarfed, and they're beginning to find more and more information on that. You could be able to pin it down much more precisely if you could get DNA from it, but DNA doesn't last for things that are a million years old, and it's just much harder to figure that part out. But you do have the anatomy to go on. So the short form is no, it isn't easy to distinguish those. You find exactly the same situation with dinosaurs and the reptile-mammal transition that I went to in Slam Dunk, and all of that is that you can always find ones that are almost this and not quite that you're expecting from a transitional form. Archaeopteryx is a beautiful example where creationists require that it be a bird, just a bird. Yeah, it's a bird with a dinosaur mouth with teeth in it and a dinosaur tail with fully bones and gastralia bones in its gut like the dinosaurs, but it's just a bird. And if you have that kind of hair splitting where it's just exactly like the other type, except for all the parts that don't fit, then it's amazing how easy the taxonomy is. I can simplify it even easier. All life is either cow or not cow. See how much that saves you on overhead?
So there's only two kinds, are you saying?
Yeah, it's just cows and not cows. And you know, that's, if you can put that on a post-it note, you know, you don't have to worry about all these cladogram trees, you know, see how simple it is? RJology, the ultimate taxonomy system, cow or not cow.
That's all right. Oh, there was I don't know. They may have scrolled by on your screen, RJ. There's a couple of good questions in the public chat. Let's see. One from Brian is okay. Is a hyolith really a Lophophoriate, and if so, why?
Oh, wow, gosh, that's one. What the? I'm trying to remember what the hell hyoliths are. They're I can't remember whether they're a plant or a very primitive animal. I'm going to cheat by doing a text search in my bibliography to see what comes up. Holy smokes! At least I know how to spell it. Boy, you may get a stumper on this one.
I was going to ask, does this count as Brian stumped the RJ?
It could very well be. This could be the first stumper. Okay, hyolith, Hyolith. I know how it's spelled. Hyoliths and small shelly faunas. Oh, okay, from the lower Cambrian. Oh, yes, Paleozoic Lophophorates. That's from a paper from Mosick et al. 2017 in Nature. Oh boy, maybe the guy's reading the Nature paper. I'll put the blurb in on that, and anybody can find out. That is one of the current views about these little critters. I can't for the life of me think of what they were looking like, whether they look like little palm frond kind of things. My memory isn't that fast, but I will put in a little reference there to what I got in the papers on it. Current paper from Nature from just back in January. That qualifies a stumper or not, because I did have to search the bibliography for it.
Well, it was well. Wait, was it your it's your bibliography that you wrote?
Yeah, I pulled it up from my reference bibliography. Yeah, I was trying to think. I knew I had something on hyoliths, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember where the hell they lived or what, because there's an awful lot of names that are really similar. Point of it in Slam Dunk, where there were these two varieties of ants that are spelled almost identically, and if anybody can manage to avoid confusing those, they're a better man than I, Gungadin. So I made a point of putting a little parentheses to describe. I described one of them as the number one and the other one as the number two. So if I referred to them again, I had to do the same thing with these T1 and T2 in the reptile mammal transition, because they're spelled almost identically and they're real easy to confuse. And so I had to make a point of separating them so that it would be a little bit easier for the reader to keep track of them. Especially when you got taxonomical things where so many different, you've only got so many letters in the alphabet, Greek and all the rest. In fact, Jonathan Wells goofed on that very point, because he, at one point in his Icons of Evolution book, referred to ornithischian on ornithorines in his thing, which is about birds. But if you looked up the book he cited, the section was actually on ornithischian dinosaurs, which are the air quotes bird hip dinosaurs that don't have anything to do with birds. And it's just because of the taxonomical peculiarity. And the actual section on birds in that book, he managed to miss completely. So I think he had confused the terms ornith. Just because one of the birds has ornith in the front doesn't mean the rest of it is the same thing, Jonathan. So I always have to be really, really careful on that kind of stuff. If that was okay on the hyoliths, at least it's a technical reference that tells where lophophorates are kind of that group that like their cousins. Oh, good God, I'm having a brain fart in here. Yikes! They're a mollusk type critter, and they used to be very, very dominant. And I think a lot of them have gone extinct. And they're a thing that's a filter-free feeder that uses a lophophore as its little technique to siphon off fluids to get nutrients. And so there's a whole group as to whether this was developed independently or whether or not it's a common descent thing where you have a variety on it. And I will defer to the people with the actual FIDs, Moziuk and Smith from Nature magazine to throw that off of the ball.
All right. Let's see. Moving on to the next question. Oh, our friend Tao has a question.
Oh, great.
Dinosaurs were
Hi, Tao.
Dinosaurs were cold-blooded, right? But birds are warm blood. Any insight on how the transition happened?
Ooh, that is a really a fascinating issue. Endothermy versus ectothermy. Dinosaurs have kind of a peculiar hybrid form. And sauropods, the giant brontosaurus types, actually could get functional warm-bloodedness just from its bulk, the mass. And these were these huge fermenting vats on legs that walked around and raked leaves off with as minimal energy as possible. And they had gastroliths in their stones that they would swallow that would help as the grinding medium to process the stuff. They probably had a very specialized microbiota, which we can't know anything at all about because they don't fossilize. Now, move over to the theropod side, your tyrannosaur end, and it's a different kettle of fish. That the evidence for them, and you can tell this from a bone histology, which is the measurement of what goes on. It's the equivalent of tree rings on a tree, where you can see the growth rate of the animal. And the metabolism for that bunch is increasingly bird-like. It's much more active. Back when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, dinosaurs were thought of entirely as sluggish, slow, clunkies. Now, the modern taxonomy, the one that just came out this year, which caused a little bit of a kerfuffle because they were arguing that, in fact, the ornithischian dinosaurs and the theropods are actually more closely related than the sauropods are. And this relates to this funky little group called the Herrerasaurs that I allude to a bit, I think, in Dinomania. I discussed them a bit about the origins of dinosaurs. So the short form and the current view would be that you were developing a functional warm-bloodedness in a variety of ways in dinosaurs generally. But the kind of hot-blooded thermostat that birds inherited from their theropods had already developed quite a bit from that time, and it then got honed even more. Remember, birds have a higher metabolism than we do, but there's quite a lot of technical literature on the dynamics of the theropods and the information that we know about how their lungs are formed and the bone histology, as I mentioned, that suggests that the theropod dinosaurs were very active animals. Relatively intelligent, the most intelligent of the dinosaurs, used to be called Stenonychosaurus. I think it's called Troodon now. They had a nomenclature name. It had a bird brain level intelligence, but we know from crows just how smart birds can be. And they had to have a fairly active metabolism to be able to deal with this kind of stuff. The one thing that we don't find much in the way of dinosaur activity is nocturnal. And that's one of the reasons why mammals were able to get along so well during the dinosaur period, because they were living in niche markets and they were the ones that went out at night. And it's no coincidence that bats, which may have evolved, as I think I mentioned in the last episode, bats may have evolved at the time of the dinosaurs. We still don't know from the fossils, but the DNA stuff suggested it was, would have been filling a night niche that the daytime living birds that had already developed fully pretty much during the dinosaur period weren't able to get onto. So hope that answers the question a bit on there. The theropods at least were not your clunky style cold-blooded.
Alrighty. And, oh, looks like we're about a half hour in. You'll know what that means. It's time for a commercial.
We're about a half hour in.
Here's a commercial. If you can, go here to this link at the bottom. If you're able to.
Strongly urge you to do so.
It would help out. It would help out our friend RJ a lot. And all right, there we go. That's the commercial.
Every Patreon that I can get is one more than I had before.
I see your logic is still sharp as usual.
It's inevitable, isn't it? You know, it's one more than one less.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Let me check the Twitter feed. All right. Oh, here we go. Okay. Couple. You notice how the creationists, anti-evolutionists are just focused on the flood.
Brachiopod.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there?
Yeah, I think I just talked over. I was checking the feed over on the other side. I'll repeat the question again for the old fart.
Oh, actually, I hadn't started yet. We got two on the flood. Because the creationists, anti-evolutionists seem to focus on that. The flood caused everything in the world. It's all explained by that. Here's one. I don't know if you know this, RJ. Did you know that global flood caused the Ice Age? The singular one.
Yes, that's their view. Back in the good old days of creationism, back in the Henry Morris era, they didn't like plate tectonics. They didn't like ice ages at all, although they were kind of flirting around with what we think of as super catastrophism. There was a guy, Velikovsky, that I know about from back in the 50s and 60s. And there was a kind of a brief neo-catastrophism area running on the fringe of geology. By the time young Earth creationism comes along in the 1960s, it's become standard thing that there were lots and lots and lots of ice ages covering in the past, and that's hard to squeeze into a everything happened over a couple months or years in the time of the flood 4,500 years ago model. So they essentially have this weird funhouse stuff. Super hot areas in some places and super cold areas in others, flash freezing mammoths, and there's water sloshing in and killing everything, and then there's that damned airborne volcanic ash. How do we account for that without turning the spigot on and off? Well, that's another little subject. But anyway, the ice ages all again relate to very specific geological contexts, and you can tell one ice age from another. For example, one of my favorite ones that actually weaned me off of catastrophism in Velikovsky was the one in India. Back in the old days, there was evidence for an ice age in India that started at the pole, or at the tip of India, and went northward. So it was starting at the equator and moving northward. And supposedly this was just inexplicable. Well, plate tectonics changed all that. And when that ice age took place during the Silurian 300 million years ago, India wasn't where it is now. It was parked down next to Antarctica and Australia at the pole. So the ice age was actually going from the big glacier ice sheets that covered the Arctic region, Antarctic regions back then, and going northward away from the pole, exactly as you would expect ice ages to do. So all of that stuff makes beautiful sense. I'll put up a couple links to the fact that are critical of the flood geology view of ice ages. It turns out this one from just last year, from the Adventists magazine Spectrum. Seventh-day Adventists were the people that invented young Earth creationism. And then it got co-opted by the Henry Morris set that knocked off all the Adventist theology and turned it into creation science. But amazingly, that there's a whole new generation of Adventists who apparently have functioning brainstems, and they're treating all of that with a grain of salt. So you've actually got these people up there that are criticizing the young Earth creationist attempts to explain the Ice Age. That they'll never be able to fit all of the available data, because you've got pulses. Ice ages come and go A lot of it relates to the positions of where the continents move. One of the things that triggered off our most recent glaciation were two factors. One was Australia kept moving away from the pole, just as India had earlier. Australia was drifting north under plate movement. And eventually it reached the stage where the water circulation that normally could go all the way up into the equatorial regions before it could get around that big Antarctic Australian blob, suddenly could go around Antarctica separately. And that circumpolar current kicked in about 5 million years ago, and that plunged the planet into a deep freeze. Around the same time, the Isthmus of Panama closed, and it cut off the Pacific from the Atlantic and all of the currents that were occurring there. And between those two, that was enough to change the climate patterns to the such that the planet went into a great big long ice age, multiple ice ages. Now because the planet moves in these Milankovitch cycles as the axis wobbles, and so sometimes the summertime is closer to the sun, and some 50,000 years later, 25,000 years later, it's farther away. At the moment, we're in a spot where we're closest to the sun during the winter in the northern hemisphere, go figure, but it's the axial inclination that determines climate more than the distance from the sun. Cycles help permute these things. So what you get is within a big climate cycle, you'll get smaller scale oscillations that will go into interglacial periods. And those typically last for about 10,000 years or so, and then it'll kick back in it again. And the climatologists go into all sorts of bits to figure that out. Deeper time to work out why ice ages are occurring, like the one in the southern hemisphere, you have to relate to the whole global climate pattern and the way oceans are moving when there was a big Pangean supercontinent, all that kind of stuff, which is really fun. And that's why geology and paleoclimate is so interesting, and why creationists don't do that. So does that kind of answer the question on part of that? Or did I bounce to the...
It certainly seems to. Yeah. And some of the explanations we've had for the flood causing the ice age make no sense. They describe processes that would actually release heat and indicate that was and indicate that actually cooled everything and caused the ice age. The ice age.
Yeah. Tao has mentioned a thing about hundreds of fossilized whales found. I think that's that deposit down in Peru. That actually was dug up by some Seventh-day Adventist Loma Vista University creationists down there. And the papers haven't actually showed up in any regular paleontology journal yet, although there's been a little bit of buzz about it in the creationist circles, and I think there's been a few references to it in the regular paleontology community, so I'm kind of keeping my pulse on that to see how the dust settles. They're all, I think, varieties of Basilosaurus, which was the first big super famous whale that spread all over the place. It's the state whale of Kansas, I believe, which shows you how far it went around. That was when Kansas was beachfront property. There used to be a big sea that went up, the Niobrara Seaway that went up all the way into Nebraska. That for a time actually cut the entire North American continent in half, but it was starting to silt up and empty at the northern end by the time of the late dinosaurs, and then it continued to fill in and get less and less water and more real estate as the continent uplifted. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was going on there. But anyway, down in that deposit down there in Chile, Peru, it'll be interesting to see what the details of them are, how many body parts there are on it, and the circumstances, the taphonomy, which is that fancy word for why things get preserved in the way they do when they die. I'm sure the creationists is going to be arguing that they were all deposited in one big gush, but if so, why do we see the exact parts that we do? And also, are we seeing transitional bits? The stuff that I saw preliminarily on the creationist website suggested they were basically skulls, and that's interesting, but we'd like to wonder if it was in a big flood deposit, why we're not seeing the rest of the body fully articulated, and if so, what? Basilosaurus was a very long snake-like whale. It's some of the versions still had vestigial legs in the back, and those are the kinds that you can see on the fossils from Egypt and various other things. And they were the one whale form that really spread all over the place. And an interesting question is how rapidly they did that. Once they left their basic habitat up in the Tethya Sea, which was in the little seaway that was shrinking as India. Remember India? It used to be down by by Antarctica. It had now crossed. It was crossing the Seychelles hotspot during the time of the dinosaur period, and then continued to move northward, and it was gradually shrinking that Tethya Sea, and eventually the Tethya Sea disappeared completely, and the whales that lived in those areas that got fossilized got pushed up, and that's why they were being dug up in Pakistan. So all of that fit together. So I hope that put a bit of a relevant teaser about what Tao was talking about, those whales, and we'll be keeping an eye on that one.
Hmm. All right. Let's see. Before we go on to there's another flood one. Oh, and it's actually one that we talked about. We'll go back to that in a second. It's one that we talked about in the Genesis History Science series. Remember where you were in on that one, RJ? So we'll go back to it.
Yeah, you can just slap a link up to that little puppy, and that will cover an awful lot.
All right, we have. Looking at my notes, we have what we held one from last week. Remember the one that was going to make everybody watching shout two words when I said it? It's a creationist assertion. Maybe we ought to pick that one up. And I'll read. If you want to address this one, we will. If not, we'll go on with the regular stuff. The assertion was, and here's the full text of it: living things have fantastically intricate features at the anatomical, cellular, and molecular level that could not function if they were any less complex or sophisticated. The only prudent conclusion is that they are the products of intelligent design, not evolution. That was the one we held
Oh,
from
yeah.
last week. Remember? Do you want to address that one now?
That's the Discovery Institute in a nutshell. They should put that onto a choir and sing that, because that's their message. The problem is when you start looking at the fiddly bit details, I'm afraid you can work out how it develops by gene duplications and gradual modifications at of years, that the genetic systems didn't pop up on that. The flagellum is one obvious example. That's the poster child for intelligent design. But of course, Michael Behe had multiple systems there, the blood clotting sequence, and there were a couple others that he went into. But when you looked at the fiddly bit details, never quite as they were advertising. They were eliminating a lot of the details and not looking at the little fuss parts. A lot of the older material that gets drawn on, and creationists have been fielding arguments like this: the perfectly matched, beautifully structured bit. Even the flagellum was being discussed by creationists before Michael Behe got his little wind to it, or rather before Michael Denton did, and then Michael Behe copied Michael Denton. But since the 1990s, as they started to work on more of the genetics, the details of how those systems are evolving over time. And since the anti-evolutionists don't pay attention to most of the papers, they're never going to get that. I looked up the name of Penson just on that back bit about the whales. I'll stick, the paper was in the Royal Society Open Science on that. Bits on their crest. That's a brand new paper. Yipes, let me go over to here. Potentially stress my data stream to have that window open. It's nice when I can go popping around and pull stuff up from my bibliography. And come on, there we go. So unless we want to belabor the point, the whole chapter that I did on creationism light at TIP went into a lot of the stuff on the bacterial flagellum and the blood clotting sequence and all the rest. It's no coincidence that the people who actually do the work in the fields are not terribly impressed with intelligent design, because they know what data is being left out. And the intelligent designer, Behe, for example, is not a blood clotting researcher. He's not a flagellum researcher. Scott Minnick at least is. But the short form is that anti-evolutionists have what I call that the gee whiz argument. That, oh, how wonderfully complicated it is. But if you look at the details, yeah, it makes sense from evolution, and it doesn't really make sense from intelligent design. Sorry.
Hmm. Alrighty then. Well, so far, let's see. Brian's in the lead for stumping the RJ. Anyway, that, that's
Oh, that the Hyalith question?
yes, yes, indeed. That one
Yeah,
I've
yeah. Because I had to hunt that one up there because the fair rule for a stumper is that I have to rely entirely on my memory.
okay.
And that I not know it in advance, so that but that since I had to look it up in my bibliography to prod my memory on it, that's a fair square stumper.
All right, so we've had one win for the night. Um, Everybody else, rack your brains for some really disturbing evolutionary questions. And in the meantime, we might as well. There was another flood one here. I'll just say it. Grand Canyon was caused by receding floodwaters. There you go. I don't know if you knew
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. That's forced on them by necessity because the creationist has to explain two things at the same time. The Grand Canyon, although there's a lot of Precambrian stuff, which means they're not filled with fossil trilobites, but a big chunk of the canyon does in fact have from the fossil bearing range, that you start having things that have fossilizable hard parts. And then they got to figure out where the canyon comes from. Now, if all of the rock bearing the fossils is laid down in the flood and the canyon is formed in the flood, how it's be happening at once? Because somehow the canyon has to turn into rocks first and congeal enough that the water then can come from some upstream flood lakey thing that's like a puddle left over that then breaches and then comes down and cuts the canyon. The problem is that we know how water works. And if the stuff hasn't congealed properly, it ain't going to form the kind of canyon that they want. And if it has formed the rocks, that even a single gushy flood won't form the canyon they want. We know this because I live in a spot that was formed by catastrophic flooding, the Spokane Missoula flood badlands. We had about dozens of different ice dam lakes that would break up and send cascades of water. I think one of the biggest flood levels that they had was about 500 feet at Portland downstream. And it produced monster ripples. Spokane itself was still under a glacial lake, Columbia, through most of that period. So it basically had water coming into the one bathtub and then going over the other. But the kinds of canyons that it carves have very steep walls. They have these little turbidity areas where it's carving holes in the rock because they get these monster gyres that form, and they can model the stuff, computers and that, to figure about a lot of that. But they don't look anything at all like the Grand Canyon, which are these monstrous stepped V-shaped valleys nested into one another that are formed of tributaries. And those are formed when you have the bottom end of where the water's coming out raising in compared to where the water's coming in faster than the water can erode. That by dropping the water level, as happened when the Mediterranean Sea dried up, and that produced the Nile. There's a big canyon that's just like a mini Grand Canyon that's been silted up in the 4 million years since. But the Grand Canyon was being formed because there was a general uplift of the continent. So it wasn't the outlet down in the Pacific Ocean that was dropping. It was the headwaters that were rising. And if it moves faster than the water can erode, that's the kind of canyon you tend to form. That doesn't make sense in a creationist context. Everything has to happen way too fast. And some things you can't speed up. You can't jack your oven up to 1,000 degrees and hope that it will cook the cake. No, you're just going to get a cinder block. And there's some things you can't nudge forward. And canyon formation is one of them. And attributing a convenient little post-flood drips to that won't get them out of the mess they're in.
Indeed. Okay. Oh, I saw another thing scroll by from another one from Brian. I think it was, if it wasn't the tail end of another comment, it sounded like Brian was asking it's gone now. When did blood evolve and the mechanism?
Oh yeah, I did spot that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a huge issue about Hemi and all of those little subsystems. It's arriving probably well before the Cambrian explosion. So you can just rule fossils out. It's not going to tell you diddly squat. So all of that stuff has to be done by retroengineering. And there's quite a lot of technical literature of which it's been jump-started in the last, once they started to develop the exact gene systems that are involved. So if it was just the era 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago, where they were just looking through a microscope and couldn't do the gene typing and couldn't see the micro details of how stuff formed. That's one stuff. I won't go through and waste time to try to do a text search on blood, because I think there's an awful lot of material on that. But the short form is when you're looking at something like a crab, that's in the crustacean arthropod line, that the common ancestor with the critters that lead off to the chordates, that we're in that vertebrate bunch, are happening probably about 1 billion years ago. That branching is probably taking place while the Ediacara biota are still alive. And exactly what little critters were involved in that common ancestral form, and whether any of those had anything at all blood-like yet. I'm not sure right off my memory, and this might qualify as a bit of a stumper, as to which components of the crab-style blood iron-based system that's used in the vertebrates, how much of that is common architecture bit, in the same way that virtually all organisms that have eyes make use of the PAX gene, the PAX6 gene that connects up, even though they're not, arthropod eyes are broadly divergent in the same way that vertebrate eyes are, and yet we still use a lot of the same sensory systems that have been co-opted for eyeballs. And I think that the current thinking is trending towards the direction that kind of oxygen that are occurring in an increasingly oxygenating world, and that therefore what we eventually call blood is being favorably selected for, that those systems are, the deep systems of those are kicking in a way long before you would ever call them blood. And later on, they're getting channeled into systems that then take on the bit where you are now running in a fluid that's starting to be pumped, and increasingly running through things that can manage that pumping and oxygen exchange back and forth with gills and all that, because gilled critters definitely show up by the time we have the Cambrian. But how far back that goes is another one of those that we can't tell from the fossils, because we just don't have any Lagerstätten deposits that preserve all those little fine body parts. On that, right off the bat, I can't quite think of the specific scientist and stuff on that, so that qualifies as a semi-stumper.
Okay, so that's a 1.5 so far.
Yeah, because I'd have to go plow through my background information in the bibliography to be able to dive in more. I'm just riffing literally off my memory of where the stuff is going. It's definitely a deep Precambrian origins issue, that bit of the stuff that's the ancestor systems that lead to eventually the stuff that we call pumpy blood.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's see.
Listening while cooking. I hope none of my blather interrupts or disturbs your culinary expertise.
All right, here's a commercial. I know.
Hey,
you
put too many of those in, it's going to look like the evening news.
Yeah. Sorry, but just trying to get the
I know
point
Jimmy. I know I need the money. I have no objections to that part.
Okay. Well, all right. As long as there's no objection. Let's see. I thought I saw a question scroll by from Fino there. Where the heck was that? Something about.
You ready? Ratchet back up. What was it? Fino, don't encourage them, holler. What do we got here? Well, we don't have any crappy silence in here, so
yeah, it was.
Do you have another question out there?
It was something. Something about gradual increase in complexity, yada yada yada, that sort of thing from iSpot. Hold on, scrolling. Let's see. What do we? Oh,
we'll say this that. Oh yeah, jump in.
This is not a valid question. We've got from this is you know what though, I did not put any disclaimers on in Twitter. I just said send your questions. Here's what you got from on Twitter from SlyGen to Stump the RJ hashtag.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you believe humans came out of a monkey's ass? I'm not making. I'm not making this up.
No. I'm afraid only the Trump cabinet came out of that. No, this is an entirely different circumstance. You completely misunderstand me, sir. Yeah, no, it's I'm afraid you need to restudy how procreation occurs. You know, ass gestation is not a hominid trait. It is not a primate trait. It is not a vertebrate trait. So I'm afraid you need to have a little bit more, or come up with a better snark line than that. Oh, Heavy Hauler is asking, have any good transitions been found from between the Cambrian and Precambrian, soft bodies to hard? That's the whole issue, is that all of the critters that we find in the Cambrian, other than trilobites, are functionally soft-bodied-ish. And the thing is that unless you have one of these super duper Lagerstätten deposits that can preserve the squishy parts, they're functionally invisible. You remove Shengjiang and Sirius Passet and Burgess Shale from the picture, and whoop, you've seemingly vaporized most of the critters in the Cambrian. The reason why it was called the Age of Trilobites is because they produced hard carapaces and they molted constantly. They replaced them in the same way that a snake sheds its skin. And so what most of the trilobite fossils are in fact the shed bodies of the exoshells that are being shed off to make a new one. Now that there is in fact a possible soft-bodied trilobite that's known from the very early Cambrian. And we're already down to relatively small critters. The chordates that are in these Cambrian Lagerstätten are little wiggly, wormy styles things that are only about an inch long. Haikuella and Pacaya and all that bunch. And the ancestor forms of those would be even smaller and all 100% soft bodied. In the Precambrian, we don't know. We know that there's a whole missing ecosystem going on in the Precambrian. We know that there were Precambrian organisms that were being preyed on, boreholes in Claudinia and the other kinds of things. And that it makes a very good sense in terms of the dynamics of how mass extinctions occur, where that there would be a body of critters that would be very soft body, that would be relatively peripheral. They could have been kept back, dominated because of the fact that they had the wrong gut microbes or all sorts of endosymbiotic processes that are involved. All we know is that if there was anything prior to the Cambrian, that they operated in very niche areas. They weren't disturbing the soil quite as much, although you get more and more soil perturbation. There's more wormy things that we don't know which kind of worm, but we know that they're making little burrows at the very latest Cambrian, Precambrian parts. So, and the big turnover between the earliest Cambrian, where you have almost a hole of nothing, holdovers from the Precambrian and something mysterious going on that we don't have enough data on, and then the small shelly fauna that dominate the next 5 million years or more, and then the big Cambrian explosion later on. So you get pulses of these things and increasing complexity from the earliest mollusks to much more complicated stuff later on. So if you look at that whole sweep, it'd be swell if we had some Precambrian Lagerstätten to look at to be able to see what was crawling around the little palm fronds of the Ediacara biota, but we don't. So we have to work at it all backwards by working out the genetics. Once in a while, you may get better examples. We've got much more sophisticated techniques and tools, but the ocean chemistry issue is probably going to always screw us. The kind of rarity of these Lagerstättens are permanently rare. Oh God, we're almost 5:57.
Oh
I've filled up an hour already.
you and that damn knowledge.
No, I just talk too much.
I would object to that statement. Okay, yeah, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's see. Maybe we can wedge one more in. Did you see any questions in the this?
Oh, I was just looking across there. Let's see, organisms that were preyed on. But if the majority of the predators were only about an inch in length, wouldn't that mean the prey would easily be in the size of water fleas? Well, you got it. That an awful lot of predator-prey crap goes on with critters that are too small to be seen without a microscope. Everything is relative. The killer predator of the Cambrian was Anomalocaris, which was about 3 feet long. The big killer predator of the Permian was Dimetrodon, which was about 6 feet long. If you're bigger than your attacker, or you need to have things, as we know from some predator animals. I mean, hyenas attack very large prey. We know from dinosaurs that Atenonychosaurus, which was a smaller sauropod, was being, or maybe it was a hadrosaur. I think it was a sauropod, was attacked by packs of Deinonychids, your velociraptor types. So pack hunters can make use of things. So size is a relative thing, and it depends on how sharp your little teeth are. If you're a vampire bat, you come in as a modern example. You're latching onto a critter way bigger than yourself. So it needs to know what kind of predation we're talking about, what kind of bacteria you are dealing with, and size is relative. Not all predators need to be bigger than the things they attack.
Alrighty. Let's see. Man, we about used up all the time we have. This okay. There's this. Um,
I hope everybody had a good time.
oh, me too. There's one. Evolution can't explain how life first appeared.
That's a whole show on that. That's
Yeah, all right.
origins or bust.
All right, we'll save it.
That'll take way more than a tweet. But
we'll
I'm up for that one. That's a fascinating subject matter, both
we'll,
in terms of the physical science that we've been gradually piecing together, and the circumstantial evidence, and also how baroque some of the broke a lot of the creationist arguments get into on this area. Yeah, that one we'll call the origins or bust show.
Okay, very good. All right. So we got about a minute left. RJ, why don't you tell everybody how they can contact you if they have additional? Because we only do an hour here. Point them to the tip site, the comments, email, all
the
that.
www. I'll put the website up there so everyone can't possibly miss it. Where the hell is the question? Oh, that's because that hasn't. Yeah, whoops! It seems like it doesn't want to send the message that I put up there. Oh, I think it's because it was too big. There we go. Yipes! Oh, I'm an idiot.
Okay, guys, for
I had a thing set up. My main website. There we go. Now I can send that one and get that off the field. My bad on that one. That was just hovered in the queue. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of comments tabs at the main hashtag tip website, which I've just sent. And anybody can pop a question on there. I check there daily to find out if there's anything popping up there. And I can either comment on it directly at that spot or make it a subject matter for a separate video to do, which I do have my little YouTube thing, or put it up here as a subject matter for the Evolution Hour. There's various venues. I can certainly put up more details about technical papers and that kind of issues at the Tortugan site, and that's an easy invite. Plus Twitter, at RJ Downard, anybody can Twitter me a question. And I'm happy to pick my goddamn brain. There we go.
All right, that's what I was saying, Fino. The technology questions are off the list for Stump the RJ sessions. All right. I guess that about wraps it up for another episode of RJ's Evolution Hour. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, RJ, for sharing your knowledge with us, as you always do, for free, which is why I keep putting up the commercial.
Thanks for the good questions. I hope we all had fun.
Oh yeah,
and enjoyed the interaction.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about throwing so many commercials up in the middle of things, but if we want RJ to keep doing what he's doing, we might want to help. And
well, as an impoverished scholar, and I'm not joking on the impoverished part. Yeah, I can certainly use any of the Patreons that we can get, or the GoFundMe. That's would be very mucho appreciated.
Indeed. All right. Well, that about wraps it up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, RJ. And just in case you missed it, here's something.
Yeah, if the power doesn't go out for next week, I'll be up for next week. I barely missed it this week.
All right. Night all. Have a pleasant evening.
Getting a deal on that credit thing.